Another thing that's an obvious way to spur a great idea is simply applying your imagination. I've written a lot of books for kids, and it helps that I have a pretty immature sense of humor, but it's useful. And I always try to look at the world through a child's eyes when I'm writing these books. It also helped that I had two kids. Now they're 17 and almost 16, so they're useless now. But when they were young, it was very useful. So I always try to apply my imagination. When I was sort of starting early in my career, and I don't know if anyone here has written for educational publishers, but I used to do that quite a bit. These books that go straight to schools to help kids learn how to read better. They're often very specific about what they want. And I got an assignment really last minute. And the assignment was write a book for 5th graders, make it 120 pages long, and make it funny. That's it. That was the assignment. Believe it or not, I was extremely busy at the time. I had about, I think, 12 days to write this book, which is absurd. And I was panicking. I could not think of an idea. I was walking around my house thinking, what's funny, what can I write about? Could not think of anything. And then I walked into my kitchen, and I opened the refrigerator, and I got something to eat, and I closed the refrigerator. And you know how the light turns on when you open the fridge, and it turns off when you close it? That gave me an idea. I wrote a book called Freddy in the Fridge, about a little man named Freddy who's 8 inches tall. He lives in the refrigerator. He sleeps on the cottage cheese. His only job is to turn that light on and off every time you open and close the refrigerator. That's the idea that popped into my head. He gets out of the fridge, he follows his kid to school. It's a pretty funny book. But I got that idea because I was hungry. And ideas can come from anywhere, and it's just a matter of having an open door policy regarding these ideas, and it could knock at any time. It knocked for my oldest son, Luke, who is now 17, and we're about to publish his 3rd book. When he was 9, he read The Hobbit. That was the book that made me become a writer, along with the English teacher in our school. That was what made me become a writer. I read that book, and I read The Lord of the Rings, and I loved the stories and everything, but I was fascinated by the fact that J.R.R. Tolkien created this whole world, and he started with a blank piece of paper. I mean, he invented languages and histories and family trees and drew maps, and he created this whole world, but he started with nothing. And that concept just fascinated me, and I started thinking, maybe I would like to do that someday. Whatever the world that may be that I create. And I actually sat down when I was 11 or 12 years old, and I started writing my own fantasy book. And I got about 2 pages into it, and I quit. I still have it, actually, those 2 pages. But I drew a map and everything, but I just sort of stopped. Well, my son Luke, when he was 9, he read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And he said, I want to write my own fantasy book. And I said, great, go for it. I thought he would do what I did and quit early on, but he didn't quit. He kept writing, and he kept writing, and he kept writing. And over 18 months, he wrote 20,000 words. And that book called Dragon Valley was published when he was 11 years old. So it's this book right here. On his 11th birthday. It was self-published. It was, we published it. But at some point we said, if you finish this book, we'll find a way to publish that book. And then he started selling it to kids all around the country, and he kept getting these emails from these kids. There's something about a kid having written a book that truly captivates kids. That's what we discovered. He started getting these emails saying it's my favorite book. I read it 5 times. I did a book report about it. Blah, blah, blah. When are you going to write your next book? Which is a lot to ask of an 11-year-old. But he started immediately, and he spent 2 years on that next book, and it's called Griffin Blade and the Bronze Finger. And now we're about to publish a collection of creepy sci-fi, sort of Edgar Allan Poe short stories that he wrote. It's called Continuum. But what that shows is that there's an imagination that some people have that is sort of almost innate. And I think the great thing about being a writer is you can try to hold on to that imagination when you become an adult and do something pretty powerful with it. When I speak to kids and when I go to elementary schools and I speak to students, I tell them that doesn't mean you have to go home and write a 300-page book, but you can certainly tell a story. you have better imaginations than adults, and you can certainly tell a story when you're a kid, and if you can hold on to that imagination when you're an adult, you can do some great things with it. Everyone can find a good story to tell. So to summarize, it's all about thinking of a good idea, developing that idea, and then telling the story in the best way possible, conveying that idea properly. And I think some of the examples I gave are different examples of that process. And any book that I write, I'm trying to utilize all that, or any article that I write, I'm trying to use all three aspects of that. I want to come up with a good idea to start. I want to figure out a way to develop that idea so that it's most compelling, and then I want to figure out the way to convey it so that it's even more compelling. And if you can do all three at once, you've caught something pretty good. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you catch a tiny little fish this big and you've got to throw it back. But that's okay, because that process of trying to be creative, of trying to come up with an idea and spread it to the world, is never a failure. It's always a triumphant act. So I applaud all the writers in the room who are trying to triumph in that manner. The results can be very rewarding, but the process itself, is a triumphant act, and I applaud everyone for doing that. So thank you for listening. I don't know how long that was, but I can answer some questions. Questions?
You got time.
Does anyone have any questions? It could be about publishing or writing or anything. If not, that's fine.
So what happens to your second son?
My second son, I love him just as much. He's actually the best editor in the family. And I'm not even, believe me, we give him the manuscripts and he can find all those things. So it's a good family. My wife is the brains behind it, and I'm just a pretty face, I guess. But it's a good family process. But everyone's got their own specific talent. Yes?
How far did you get on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
I didn't win $1 million. You really want to?
Yeah, I really want to know.
I won $64,000. This was in April of 2000, when it was the #1 show in America. There were 25 million people watching the show, so I was really nervous. Yeah.
Which town most fit their name?
Which town most? It wasn't Harmony, California, I'll tell you that. Friendship, Maine, maybe. We got taken out by this family on this little 1902 restored Friendship sloop on the Gulf of Maine, and it took us out sailing, and it was this wonderful experience. So that's the one that pops into my head. I will say this, back to the millionaire thing. One thing to note is that, I guess I got on that show because of my writing and my trivia and gaining the education. But while I was on that show, I got questions that, for example, I once wrote an article about Peter Yarrow of Peter, Paul, and Mary, and how he wrote because I went to Cornell University, I wrote for their alumni magazine, I've written for them for 25 years. Peter Yarrow went to Cornell. He wrote the song Puff the Magic Dragon while he was at Cornell, so I wrote an article about it. One of my questions was about Puff the Magic Dragon. So you just never know where this education is going to pop up when you're a writer. Now, there were other things where I was way too, I won't talk about it. I was too conservative and nervous. And I had the answer to the next question. I decided to take the money, and I had the right answer. But it was, like I said, there were 25 million people watching. So they do a pre-interview with you. The producers do a pre-interview with you on there. At least they used to. I can't watch the show anymore. I get hives. But the producers ask you all about yourself. So that at the time it was Regis Philbin, was asking me questions about how I met. Well, it turns out that I'm going on a tangent here, but it turns out that the woman who was in that hot seat right before me on the show was a good friend of mine. I've known her husband since I was 9 years old at that summer camp. She was right before me, so he asked about, which is part of the billion thing. He asked me about that, all of a sudden. But I had just written this book, States of Mind, about traveling around the country for a year. And I thought, why isn't he, I kept asking the producer during the commercial break, what's he going to ask me about my book? So finally, after I guessed correctly on that $64,000 question, he asked me about my latest book. I described it for 30 seconds, and within within 24 hours, it was the 7th best-selling book on Amazon.com. It didn't translate into what you think it might translate into, but it was fun. I went back to New York a week later. I was on the Today Show with Matt Lauer. My wife and I were on Oprah a month later. Like, I was famous for about a month and a half, and then just toned it back down. But the writing is still a big part of that whole story. Just the opportunities that writing created. So, yeah.
I was going to ask about the alphabet book, W is for Welcome. Have you written other alphabet books, or was this your first one?
I have, thank you for reminding me, because I have my books here. They're for sale afterwards. I'll answer your question in a second. Before I forget, I am giving away, there's a book that I wrote that I self-published 4 years ago called My Mantelpiece. It's the co-authored memoirs of a woman named Carolyn Goodman, who passed away before it was published. But I had spent much time with her getting her story. She's the mother of a guy named Andrew Goodman, who, if anyone is familiar with the 1964 civil rights murders of Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman, Andrew Goodman was one of the victims. Carolyn was his mother. I got to know her by writing a magazine article about her. She asked me to co-author her memoirs. She passed away before the manuscript was completely done. But I talked with her other son, David. We self-published it on the 50th anniversary of those murders in 2014. And we had a forward by Maya Angelou right before she died. And we're giving half the money to the Andrew Goodman Foundation. But we printed too many books. So I'm giving everyone a free book. You get a book, you get a book. So if anyone wants it, it's going to be available at the table. My other books are there too. And to get to your question, I've written about a dozen alphabet books with Sleeping Bear Press in Michigan about baseball, football, a lot of sports, about the environment. And so this one, I convinced them to let me do this one called W is for Welcome, a celebration of America's diversity. Because I think it shouldn't have to be a statement in the year 2018, but apparently it is. And so I'm really excited about that.